This is not a corridor. It is the cage I have built for you.
History remembers empires. Midnight Relics remembers what they buried.
A queen sits alone in a sealed stone chamber. Outside, Roman guards wait. Inside, the most powerful woman in the ancient world is running out of time. For 10 days, Cleopatra is trapped between two impossible choices: surrender and live in humiliation, or die and abandon the children she desperately wants to save. History remembers a snake, a basket of figs, and a tragic love story. But the truth hidden behind those final days is far darker. Because Cleopatra's death wasn't simply a suicide, it was the final move in a ruthless psychological war designed to break her before she ever reached the grave. Imagine standing outside a locked stone chamber in Alexandria on a hot August night. Roman soldiers line the corridors. Torches flicker against the walls. No one is allowed inside without permission. No one is allowed to leave. Behind that door sits a woman who once commanded armies, controlled one of the richest kingdoms on earth, and negotiated as an equal with the most powerful men Rome had ever produced. Now she is a prisoner. Not in chains, not in a dungeon, but trapped inside something far more dangerous, a carefully designed psychological cage. For more than 2,000 years, history has remembered Cleopatra through the lens Rome wanted us to see: a seductive queen, a tragic lover, a woman destroyed by her own ambition. But those stories were written by the victors, and victors rarely tell the truth about the people they fear. By the summer of 30 BC, Cleopatra had already lost almost everything. Her fleets had been destroyed, her allies had abandoned her. Her armies were collapsing, and the man she had built her future around, Mark Antony, was watching his world fall apart. The final blow came after the disastrous defeat at the Battle of Actium. For months, Antony and Cleopatra tried to hold together what remained of their power. They hoped Egypt's wealth could buy them time. They hoped loyalty would survive fear. It didn't. One city after another surrendered. One commander after another changed sides. The empire they had spent years building was disappearing before their eyes. Meanwhile, far to the west, Octavian advanced steadily toward Alexandria. Young, patient, relentless. He understood something many conquerors never learned. Winning the war was not enough. You also had to control the story people remembered afterward. And for that story to work, Cleopatra had to become the villain. As Roman forces closed in on Alexandria, panic spread through the city. Citizens hid their valuables. Merchants prepared to flee. Nobles quietly began negotiating with the enemy. Everyone could feel the end approaching. Cleopatra felt it too. But unlike most rulers facing defeat, she had been preparing for this moment for years. Near the Temple of Isis stood a massive mausoleum she had ordered constructed. Part tomb, part fortress, part treasury. Inside were gold, silver, priceless artifacts, royal documents, and enough wealth to tempt any conqueror. It was more than a burial place. It was her final refuge. If Egypt fell, this would be where her last stand began. Then came the devastating lie. Someone informed Mark Antony that Cleopatra had taken her own life. The news shattered him. Exhausted, defeated, and believing the woman he loved was gone forever, Antony made a decision that could never be undone. He fell upon his own sword. But the report was false. Cleopatra was alive, very much alive. And when word reached her that Antony was dying outside her tomb, the situation became desperate. She could not simply open the doors. Roman soldiers were everywhere. Capture was only moments away, yet she could not abandon him. Ancient sources describe a scene that feels almost unbelievable. Ropes were lowered from an opening high above. The dying Antony was attached and slowly pulled upward. Every movement brought agony. Every breath could have been his last. As Cleopatra and her attendants struggled to lift him, blood stained the stone. The future queen of legend was no longer negotiating with emperors. She was hauling a dying man into a tomb with her own hands. When Antony finally reached her, he was barely alive. The man who had once commanded Roman legions now had nothing left except his final words. Moments later, he died in Cleopatra's arms. For a brief time, the world outside disappeared. The war, the politics, the betrayals. All of it faded. Only grief remained. But history rarely grants rulers the luxury of mourning. Before Cleopatra could fully process what had happened, Octavian's forces surrounded the tomb. And this is where something strange occurred, something most people never question. Octavian did not attack. He did not smash down the doors. He did not burn the structure. He did not send soldiers charging inside. Instead, he waited. Why? Because a dead Cleopatra was useful, but a living Cleopatra was far more valuable. A dead queen could become a martyr. A living queen could become a spectacle. Octavian needed her alive. He needed Rome to see her defeated, humiliated, broken. Only then could he transform a brutal civil war into a glorious victory over a foreign enemy. So he began with deception. Messengers approached the tomb carrying promises of negotiations, promises of mercy, promises concerning her children. Cleopatra listened carefully, but she trusted none of them. She had spent decades navigating political intrigue. She knew how power worked, and she knew that victorious men often spoke kindly when they needed something. While discussions continued, Octavian's soldiers quietly climbed the structure. The same opening used to pull Antony inside became the weakness that changed everything. Without warning, Roman troops entered. The queen reacted instantly. Ancient accounts claim she reached for a hidden dagger, not to fight, not to escape, but to end her own life before capture became possible. The soldiers moved faster. They seized her, disarmed her, restrained her. For the first time in years, Cleopatra was completely powerless. Imagine the shock of that moment. A woman who had negotiated with Julius Caesar, a woman who had commanded fleets and kingdoms, a woman who had ruled Egypt itself, now held down by enemy soldiers inside her own tomb. She reportedly screamed that she would never allow herself to be taken to Rome, never allow herself to be paraded before cheering crowds, never allow herself to become a trophy. But the soldiers had direct orders. No matter what happened, Cleopatra must stay alive. Because Octavian's greatest victory had not yet begun. The moment Cleopatra was removed from the tomb, the war effectively ended. Egypt belonged to Rome. Its treasures belonged to Rome. Its future belonged to Rome. But Octavian was still not satisfied, because conquering a kingdom and controlling how people remembered that conquest were two very different things. Back in Rome, millions would eventually hear the story of this victory. The question was simple. What story would they hear? The truth was complicated, too complicated. Romans had spent years fighting other Romans. Friends had killed friends. Generals had turned against generals. Families had been torn apart. Calling it a civil war made everyone uncomfortable. Civil wars leave scars. They raise difficult questions, and they force people to confront responsibility. Octavian wanted something cleaner, something easier, something politically useful. He needed a villain, and Cleopatra was perfect. She was foreign, she was wealthy, she was powerful. Most importantly, she was already famous. If he could convince Rome that Mark Antony had not betrayed his country for power, but because he had fallen under the influence of a dangerous Egyptian queen, then the entire conflict could be rewritten. No longer a Roman civil war, now it became a heroic struggle against an Eastern threat, a battle to save Rome itself. That narrative would help transform Octavian from a victorious general into something far, the future ruler of the Roman world. But there was one problem. Cleopatra was still alive, and alive people have a dangerous habit. They can contradict propaganda. So Octavian devised a different strategy. Instead of killing her immediately, he ordered her confined inside a heavily guarded chamber within the royal palace. The room was carefully selected. Only one entrance, a small window too narrow for escape. Guards posted day and night. Nothing sharp, nothing poisonous, nothing that could be turned into a weapon. Every object became a potential threat. Every piece of clothing was inspected. Every possession was searched. According to ancient accounts, even her hair and garments were checked regularly for hidden tools or poison. The precautions sound excessive, but Octavian understood exactly who he was dealing with. Cleopatra had spent her entire life finding solutions where none appeared to exist. If there was a way to die, she would find it. And that could not be allowed. At least not yet, because Octavian needed time. Time to prepare Rome. Time to organize his triumph. Time to break the queen's resistance. What followed over the next several days was not ordinary imprisonment. It was psychological warfare. The objective was simple: make Cleopatra choose life. Not because she wanted it, but because she believed she had no alternative. The most effective weapon available wasn't violence. It wasn't torture. It wasn't starvation. It was her children. No mother could easily ignore their fate, and Octavian knew it. Cleopatra's eldest son, Caesarion, represented a unique threat. Unlike Octavian, who was Julius Caesar's adopted heir, Caesarion was believed to be Caesar's biological son. That fact alone made him dangerous. As long as Caesarion lived, questions about legitimacy would remain. Questions Octavian could never fully answer. The younger children mattered less politically, but they mattered enormously to Cleopatra. They were all she had left. Her kingdom was collapsing. Her lover was dead. Her future had vanished. Only her children remained, and that is precisely where Octavian applied pressure. Messages began arriving, carefully crafted, perfectly calculated. Your children are safe. Your cooperation will help ensure their future. Their survival depends on your choices. Each message carried the same hidden meaning. Stay alive, obey, submit, or risk losing everything. Imagine sitting alone in that chamber hearing such words. You know the man speaking cannot be trusted. You know promises from conquerors are often worthless. Yet you also know that if there is even a tiny chance those promises are real, can you afford to ignore them? That uncertainty became its own prison. Every day, Cleopatra faced the same impossible calculation. If she died, perhaps her children would suffer. If she lived, she would eventually be dragged through Rome as a defeated queen. Either path led to disaster. There was no victory left, only different forms of loss. As the days passed, Octavian intensified the pressure. Visitors entered the chamber, not diplomats, not negotiators, architects, engineers, men carrying measuring rods and writing tablets. At first, the purpose seemed unclear. Then the questions began. They measured her height, her proportions, the dimensions of her body. They discussed platforms, structures, displays, and eventually the horrifying truth became obvious. These men were preparing for the triumph, preparing for Rome, preparing for her humiliation. Imagine hearing strangers calmly discuss how your public disgrace should be presented to hundreds of thousands of spectators, not as a person, not as a queen, but as a prop, a living symbol of defeat. The message could not have been clearer. This is happening. Your future is already being built. Every measurement felt like another chain being locked into place. Every visit reinforced the same reality. You are going to Rome. You will be displayed. You will be remembered exactly as Octavian wishes. Meanwhile, another message always followed. News about her children, a report about Caesarion, a comment about the younger ones. Just enough information to keep hope alive. Just enough hope to prevent surrender to death. It was a carefully balanced system. Fear on one side, hope on the other. Humiliation pulling her toward death, motherhood pulling her back toward life. Day after day, hour after hour, the pressure never stopped, and slowly the walls of that chamber began closing in, because Cleopatra was starting to realize something terrifying. The prison around her was not built from stone. It was built from choices, and every choice led exactly where Octavian wanted. By the seventh day, Cleopatra was exhausted. Not physically, psychologically. There is a kind of suffering that leaves no wounds, no scars, no visible evidence. Yet it destroys people just as effectively as any weapon. That was the battlefield Octavian had created. Every morning she woke inside the same stone chamber, the same guards, the same uncertainty, the same impossible decision waiting for her. Outside those walls, the future of Egypt was already being dismantled piece by piece. Treasuries were being catalogued, officials were changing loyalties, Roman administrators were preparing to take control. The kingdom her ancestors had ruled for centuries was disappearing, and there was nothing she could do about it. For perhaps the first time in her life, Cleopatra possessed no political leverage, No army, no allies, no negotiation strategy, no hidden advantage. Only time, and even that was running out. Ancient accounts suggest that around this point she stopped eating. Food arrived, she ignored it. Water was offered, she barely touched it. The guards noticed immediately. Of course they did. Everything she did was being watched. Everything was being reported. Within hours, word reached Octavian. The queen was attempting to fade away. Not through violence, not through poison, but through refusal. Refusal to participate. Refusal to continue. Refusal to give him what he wanted. Octavian responded with remarkable speed. Not with threats, not with punishment. Instead, he used the one weapon that never seemed to fail: Caesarion. For the first time since her capture, Cleopatra was allowed to see her eldest son. Imagine that moment. Days of isolation, days of uncertainty, days spent wondering whether he was alive. Then suddenly the door opens, and there he stands, 17 years old, the son of Julius Caesar, the last hope of a dynasty that was already collapsing around him. Ancient writers describe the meeting as brief, painfully brief. Guards remained nearby, every word observed, every movement monitored, yet even a few minutes were enough. Because Caesarion didn't discuss politics, he didn't discuss power, he didn't discuss strategy. He simply begged his mother to live, to eat, to survive, to stay with him. And suddenly the calculations changed again. How do you embrace death when your child is asking you not to? How do you choose dignity over the face of someone you love? That was exactly the dilemma Octavian wanted. And for a moment, it worked. That night, Cleopatra ate. The next day, she drank water. The will to die had been interrupted. Not defeated, but interrupted. And that distinction mattered, because time was running out for Octavian too. His fleet would not wait forever. Rome expected results. The triumph had to move forward. The queen had to be transported. Everything was approaching its final stage. Then came the meeting that may have changed everything. On August 8th, Octavian visited Cleopatra personally. No messengers, no intermediaries, no carefully filtered reports, just the conqueror and the conquered, face to face. It is impossible to know every word that was spoken. History leaves us fragments rather than complete conversations, but enough survives to understand the essence. Octavian presented an offer: not freedom, not mercy, an arrangement if Cleopatra cooperated, if she traveled to Rome peacefully, if she participated in the triumph without resistance. Then her children would supposedly be protected, raised safely, educated, given futures. Even Caesarion, according to the promise, would be spared. It sounded reasonable, almost compassionate. But beneath the surface lurked a question neither side voiced aloud. Could Octavian actually be trusted? Cleopatra had spent decades among rulers. She knew promises made after victory were often worthless. Victors rarely shared power. Victors rarely tolerated rivals. And Caesarion represented the greatest rival of all, a living reminder that Julius Caesar had another possible heir. Even if Octavian never admitted it, that reality alone made the boy dangerous. Still, the offer achieved its purpose. It created uncertainty. And uncertainty can be more powerful than fear. Because fear points in one direction, uncertainty points everywhere. For 3 days, Cleopatra considered her options. 3 days suspended between hope and despair. 3 days wondering whether sacrifice might save. 3 days wondering whether surrender was worth the humiliation. 3 days wondering whether any choice mattered anymore. Then something happened. Something the historical record never fully explains. Perhaps a servant whispered information. Perhaps a guard revealed more than intended. Perhaps Cleopatra simply understood human nature too well. Whatever the cause, a realization appears to have struck her with devastating clarity. Caesarion was never going to survive. Not truly, not in the long term, not while Octavian ruled. The promises were part of the game. The negotiations were part of the performance. The outcome had already been decided. And if that realization is correct, everything suddenly changes. Because the trap Octavian had constructed depended on hope. Take away hope, and the trap collapses. If her son was doomed regardless, if cooperation changed nothing, if surrender achieved nothing, then only one thing remained under her control, her final choice. The choice Octavian had spent 10 days trying to prevent. And once Cleopatra reached that conclusion, events began moving very quickly. She requested permission to visit Antony's tomb, a final farewell, a final offering, a final act of mourning. To Roman authorities, the request seemed harmless. The defeated queen wanted to honor a dead lover before departing for Rome. Nothing unusual about that. Permission was granted. Escorted by guards, Cleopatra returned to the place where Antony had died in her arms, the place where her world had truly ended. What happened during that visit remains one of history's greatest mysteries. But when Cleopatra emerged from the tomb, witnesses noted something different. Something had changed. The uncertainty was gone, the hesitation had vanished. For the first time since her capture, she appeared calm, almost peaceful, as though a decision had finally been made. And once that decision existed, nothing Octavian built could stop what came next. The morning of August 12th, 30 BC, began like every other morning of the previous 10 days. Roman guards stood watch outside Cleopatra's chamber. The corridors remained quiet. The palace remained secure. Nothing appeared unusual. No alarms, no shouting, no signs that history was about to take a turn that would echo for more than 2,000 years. Inside the chamber, Cleopatra was preparing for the final act of her life, not as a prisoner, not as a defeated enemy, but as a queen. That distinction mattered. For 10 days, Octavian had attempted to strip away every symbol of authority she possessed. Her armies were gone, her kingdom was gone, her freedom was gone. Yet one thing remained beyond his reach: the ability to decide how her story ended. Ancient sources disagree on the exact details. Some speak of poison. Others describe a hidden snake. Others suggest methods that have long since been lost to history. What matters is not the mechanism. What matters is the decision. Because the method was only a tool. The choice itself was the real act. Sometime during the morning, Cleopatra gathered her two most loyal attendants. Women who had remained beside her through the collapse of a kingdom, through war, through defeat, through the death of Antony, through every terrible day of captivity. Iris, Charmian, names often forgotten by history, yet they chose to remain with their queen until the very end. Together they prepared the chamber, not like prisoners awaiting death, like royalty preparing for a ceremony. Cleopatra dressed herself in royal garments. She adorned herself with the symbols of her office. Every detail carried meaning. Every choice sent a message. Rome could conquer Egypt. Rome could seize its wealth. Rome could destroy its dynasty. But Rome would not decide how Cleopatra met death. Hours passed. Outside, the guards suspected nothing. They had searched her countless times, inspected every item, removed every apparent danger. The system had worked perfectly, or so they believed. Then silence settled over the chamber, a different kind of silence, the kind that follows a decision already made. When the door finally opened, the psychological war was over. The guards found Cleopatra lying upon a golden couch, motionless, still wearing the regalia of a ruler, still presenting herself as Egypt's queen, not Rome's captive. Nearby lay Iris, already dead, and beside the couch stood Charmian, barely alive, using what little strength remained to adjust the royal diadem resting upon Cleopatra's head. It is one of the most haunting scenes preserved from the ancient world, a dying servant, using her final moments not to save herself, but to ensure her queen looked like a queen, even in death. One of the guards reportedly asked her a question. Was this well done? Charmian's answer survived the centuries. Extremely well, and fitting for a descendant of so many kings. Moments later, she too was gone. Cleopatra was 39 years old, the last active ruler of Ptolemaic Egypt, the final pharaoh. And with her death, an entire era ended. But the story did not end there, because Octavian's reaction reveals something crucial about power. He had won, completely. His enemy was dead. Egypt belonged to him. The Mediterranean world was effectively his. Yet even then, He refused to surrender control of the narrative. He could not parade the real Cleopatra through Rome, so he created a substitute, an image, an effigy, a version of Cleopatra designed for public consumption. During his triumph, Romans saw a representation of the defeated queen. They saw exactly what Octavian wanted them to see: a dangerous foreign ruler, a seductive threat, a symbol of corruption overcome by Roman virtue. The spectacle worked extraordinarily well. For generation after generation, the Roman version became the accepted version. The real woman slowly disappeared beneath layers of propaganda. The brilliant strategist became a temptress. The skilled politician became a seductress. The ruler became a myth, and myths are easier to control than facts. Then came the final tragedy: Caesarion, the son Cleopatra had desperately hoped to save, the son whose future had been used as leverage throughout those 10 terrible days, the son who represented the last possible challenge to Octavian's authority. Within weeks, he was dead, captured while attempting to flee, eliminated before he could become a threat. The promises had meant nothing, exactly as Cleopatra had likely suspected. Her younger children survived, but survival came at a cost. They would never return to rule Egypt, never reclaim what had been lost, never restore the dynasty that had ended with their mother. The kingdom was gone forever, which raises the question that historians still debate today. Did Cleopatra win anything? On one hand, she failed to save Egypt, failed to preserve her dynasty, failed to protect Caesarion. Octavian achieved nearly everything he wanted. On the other hand, there was one victory he never obtained. He never paraded Cleopatra alive through Rome. He never broke her publicly. He never forced her to participate in a spectacle designed to complete her humiliation. The final decision remained hers, and perhaps that is why her story continues to fascinate people after more than 20 centuries. Not because of romance, not because of snakes, not because of legends, but because her final days expose a timeless truth about power. The strongest forms of power rarely rely on force alone. They rely on manipulation, pressure, fear, isolation, control of information, control of hope, control of the story itself. That was Octavian's true weapon, a carefully constructed psychological machine designed to leave his enemy with no acceptable choices. And for 10 days, it came dangerously close to succeeding. Yet in the end, Cleopatra identified the one thing that machine could not completely control: her own decision, the last fragment of agency remaining to her. Everything else had already been taken: her throne, her kingdom, her future, her family, her freedom. Only one choice remained, and she guarded that choice until the very end. When people remember Cleopatra today, they often imagine beauty, luxury, and romance. But those final 10 days tell a different story. A darker story, a story about power and resistance, about psychological warfare, about a woman watching her world collapse, while fighting to preserve the last piece of herself that still belonged to her. The palace where she spent those final days has vanished beneath the waters of Alexandria. The chamber is gone, the tomb is lost, the witnesses are dust, yet the question remains: if every outcome leads to defeat, if every path ends in loss, what does dignity actually mean? Perhaps Cleopatra's final days provide an answer. Sometimes victory is impossible. Sometimes survival changes nothing. Sometimes the only thing left to protect is the right to choose. And in those final hours, inside a silent stone chamber overlooking a dying kingdom, Cleopatra made the one choice Octavian could never make for her. Lessons for us from this history. 1. Power is strongest when it controls the narrative. History is often written by winners, so questioning official stories is essential to understanding the truth. 2. Psychological pressure can be more powerful than physical force. Fear, isolation, and manipulation are often used to break people, long before violence is necessary. 3. True dignity comes from protecting your principles when everything else is lost. Even in defeat, individuals can preserve their identity and self-respect through their choices. 4. Hope can be used as both a source of strength and a tool of control. Leaders and institutions sometimes exploit people's hopes and fears to influence their decisions. For more than 2,000 years, the world remembered the story Rome wanted it to remember. A queen defeated, a kingdom conquered, a legend reduced to propaganda. But when you look closer, Cleopatra's final days reveal something far more unsettling. Not the story of a woman who lost everything, but the story of a ruler who refused to surrender the last choice that still belonged to her. So what do you think? Was Cleopatra's final act a victory, a defeat, or something in between? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy uncovering the darker truths hidden beneath history's most famous legends, make sure the Midnight Relics channel to subscribe and join us for the next journey into the past. Because history is never as simple as the story we're told.